Hello, welcome to your academy. At your academy, we have been dealing with Biographia Literaria by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. In the last lecture, we dealt with chapter 13 of Biographia Literaria, wherein we dealt with the concept of imagination and fancy and discussed primary imagination, secondary imagination, and fancy. If you want to watch that lecture, in case you have missed that lecture, you can check out this link at the top and you can watch that lecture in detail. In today's lecture, we will deal with chapter 14 and chapter number 18. Now, as we know that this book, Biographia Literaria, is a voluminous book which has got more than 20 chapters. And all those chapters deal with different things, different ideas, different concepts, as we have dealt with already. Chapter 14 and chapter 18, they focus on ideas of William Wordsworth propagated in preface to lyrical ballads, or written in lyrical ballads, as a preface to lyrical ballads. As I have already told that a large chunk, a large volume of Biographia Literaria is dedicated to Wordsworth and preface to lyrical ballads, and the ideas or theory are opinions of William Wordsworth. As we know that Coleridge did not agree with all that Wordsworth had to say about the poetry and about the criticism about the poet and about other things. Now, after discussing primary imagination and secondary imagination, in chapter 14, uh, Samuel Taylor Coleridge takes up the ideas of poetry and poet by William Wordsworth. Now, if you go back to the preface to lyrical ballads, in preface to lyrical ballads, William Wordsworth would define poetry as a spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions recollected in tranquility, and he would define poet as a man talking to men, wherein there is not generally too much of a difference. Now, Coleridge did not agree with both these definitions. Neither did he agree with the definition of poetry that it is the powerful overflow of spontaneous emotions recollected in tranquility, though he did agree with the fact that poetry does contain passion. It contains passion, it consists of passions and emotions, but whether they are spontaneous and what is their ultimate, and there was a difference in what Coleridge had to say. And Coleridge, when he defines poetry, he says poem is an organic construct which, unlike works of science, proposes for its immediate object pleasure, not truth. This is what Coleridge had to say about poetry. There are certain things that you need to keep in mind. One, Coleridge says that poetry is unlike science, whose immediate effect is pleasure, not truth. But the focus here must be at the word immediate, because he is using the word immediate and he is not using the word end result. So the immediate result, the immediate task of the poetry is to give pleasure. But Coleridge does not stop here. He says that the end result of the poetry must be didactic. So he says that you just cannot, keep on talking about the truths, about the facts like the science does. Poetry is very different from science, and its immediate end is to give pleasure. But this pleasure, says Coleridge, is just like sugar coating, because the end result must be didactic in nature, must be to teach. So there is an element of teaching with delight. Now, why is Coleridge, interested in this immediate effect of poetry, which is pleasure? Because Coleridge would also disagree with Wordsworth's idea of meter, or use of meter. And if you're talking about facts and truths, then meter does not significantly come into place. But when you talk of passions and of pleasure, meter has a greater significance to do. So therefore, Coleridge restricts to a greater level the definition of poetry or the purpose of poetry merely to the pleasure. But again, you should not be mistaken here for the fact that Coleridge supposes that the function or the result of the poetry is only to give pleasure. No, it's only the immediate result. If you take up a poem and you read it, you would just love that poem if it's rhyming nicely, written in good meter, and that metric composition, that meter gives you a lot of pleasure and joy. But there must also be a good subject that poem must contain. The immediate pleasure of that poem would come out of its meter, and the end result, the last pleasure perhaps, would come out of the thematic concerns that the poem would deal. Now that was the definition of poetry by Coleridge, and he also defines in chapter number 14 poet. Now when he defines poet, he reinstates his ideas of primary imagination and secondary imagination as discussed in chapter 13, and we discussed those in the earlier lecture. When dealing with poet, Coleridge gives reference again to primary imagination and secondary imagination, because what Wordsworth had said earlier, that poet is a man talking to men, but Coleridge had already established a degree of difference between a poet and a common man when he was distinguishing between primary imagination and secondary imagination. And he told us there, secondary imagination is poetic imagination, and it differs in degree, not in kind. So while discussing the imagination, the concept of imagination, Coleridge has already given a higher degree of status, higher degree of significance and importance to the poet than to a common man. Therefore, in defining poet, Coleridge would tell us that poet consists of the complete or whole soul of the universe, because the task of the poet is to unify and to recreate, because he has got the secondary imagination. Now what does Coleridge say about poet? He says the poet, described in ideal perfection, brings the whole soul of man into activity, with the subordination of its faculties to each other according to their relative worth and dignity. He diffuses a tune and spirit of unity that blends and fuses each into each by that synthetic and magical power to which we have exclusively appropriated the name of imagination. This power, first put in action by the will of understanding and retained under their irremissive, though gentle and unnoticed control, reveals itself in the balance or reconciliation of opposites and discordant qualities. Now that is what he has to say about poet, who brings whole soul of humanity into activity. See, the ultimate end of the human beings is to create, because we are considered to be the best of the creations created by God Almighty. So we must have that creativeness within us. We must be active, and we must be active in creating something good. But that real essence of human beings is not brought out by every Tom, Dick and Harry. This task is done by one and only, and he is poet. And from where does poet get these faculties into activity? Is through the magical power of imagination, through the power of imagination, and particularly through secondary imagination, because we had read earlier also that the task of secondary imagination is to dissipate, is to dissolve, is to diffuse the subject matter and create out of that, is to blend. So he does make use of these words even in defining the task of the poet, or in defining the poet, the status of poet. And poet like secondary imagination, the task of poet like secondary imagination is to recreate. So the recreation process brings into unity, both conscious and subconscious efforts of the human mind, which not all human beings do. So Coleridge again differs in the definition of poet in degree as compared to that of Wordsworth. Wordsworth considered man, poet as man talking to men, because he was a man who had, we just can't say that he was very common man, but after all he was a man. That is why you will find in Wordsworth's analysis of poetry that poetry should be written in rustic language, should not make use of high diction, should not make use of meter, should not make up some specialized kind of poetry. It must be common like other common people around. But that is not the case with Coleridge. Coleridge gives a higher degree of importance or significance to poet because of secondary imagination and because of the nature of his task or his activity, which is to recreate. So if he has to recreate and if he has to bring in the whole soul of humanity into activity, he has to be different from the common man. So that was the definition of poet, or these were the ideas of Coleridge about poet. So chapter 14 would primarily focus upon these two things, that is definition of poetry and the definition of poet, which he basically refuted the arguments made by William Wordsworth regarding poet and poetry in Preface to Lyrical Ballads, which Coleridge disagreed with. Now, after chapter number 14, we come to chapter number 18 of Biographia Literaria. Now, chapter number 18 again depends upon Preface to Lyrical Ballads, because its subject matter will again be derived from Preface to Lyrical Ballads. Now, in Preface to Lyrical Ballads, William Wordsworth also made some arguments regarding the use of meter in poetry and diction and other things. And Wordsworth, perhaps you can say, was the only poet who was a romantic poet, great romantic poet, wrote poetry and said that there is no essential difference between the language of prose and the language of poetry. That perhaps would be the greatest statement any poet could make. There is no essential difference between the language of prose and language of poetry. However, everyone knows that there is great difference between the language of poetry and language of prose, and that difference primarily lies in the use of meter. Poets make use of meter, whether they are writing in Urdu, whether they are writing in English, whether they are writing in any native language, they make use of meter. So the essential difference which existed since ages between the language of prose and language of poetry was meter. But Wordsworth somehow argued against it. And he said that, one, there is no essential difference between the language of prose and language of poetry. Therefore, meter does not find necessarily a place if you are composing a poetry. Coleridge, this argument of Wordsworth did not go well with Coleridge. So he gave his own ideas about meter. So he said that there are many people around the world who have made statements in history which are just can't be said are out of the box, but are like out of this world. We, says Coleridge, did not expect Wordsworth to say a thing like this, that there is no essential difference between the language of poetry and the language of prose, whereas in reality there is great difference between language of prose and language of poetry. He says that it's not only between language of prose and language of poetry that there is obvious difference. Coleridge says that even the language of prose written and the language of prose in conversation, there is difference between the two. When you are speaking and when you are writing, you write in completely different ways. One can decipher or see obvious differences in the language of prose that is spoken and that is written. And then to make a statement that there is no difference between language of poetry and language of prose is absolutely not understood or accepted. He says that there is great significance of word meter in poetry. Now, if there is significance of word meter in poetry, then the language of poetry differs from the language of prose, because obviously prose is not a metric composition. Poetry is a metric composition. So he says, thank God that Wordsworth did accept the fact that poetry contains passions. Now, if poetry consists of passions or contains passions, this means that there is pleasure. And the only mode through which we can derive pleasure as human beings is through meter. And that pleasure cannot be found in prose. Coleridge makes three arguments in favor of meter. First, he says that elements of meter owe their existence to a state of increased excitement. So the meter itself should be accompanied by the natural language of excitement. One of the reasons why meter should be there, because it brings in excitement, it brings in passion. And since in poetry there are passions, there are emotions, that is a reason that meter must be a part of the poetry. You just cannot say that meter cannot be the part of poetry. Meter has to be part of the poetry, because the immediate end of or immediate result of poetry is pleasure. Pleasure comes from passion and excitement, and passion and excitement cannot be aroused through prosaic language but through poetic language. And poetic language can be poetic only if it is metric, if it contains meter. And if it contains meter, it differs from the language of prose. Secondly, that as these elements are formed into meter artificially by a voluntary act with the design and for the purpose of blending delight with emotion, so the traces of present volition should throughout the metrical language be proportionately discernible. Now, herein, the task of meter is to blend in delight and emotion. Now, again, what Coleridge is doing, he is assigning the task of pleasure and delight in poetry to what? To meter. Because emotions are there already, passions are there already, and Wordsworth did not deny the presence of passions and emotions in poetry, but he denied the presence of meter in poetry. But he says this is not done. Poetry blends, unifies the delight and emotions, and these two things put together bring in the pleasure. Therefore, if poetry has to bring out pleasure, it must contain meter. So that is one of the arguments that Coleridge makes in favor of the meter. Secondly, he says, I argue from the effects of meter. As far as meter acts in and for itself, it tends to increase the vivacity and susceptibility both of the general feelings and of the attention. Vivacity and susceptibility are two words that he uses. Vivacity is a word which is used for attraction. What does meter do? It increases the element of attraction in the poetry. You take up a poem and you read it. It's written in best of the meter. You would be overjoyed, even if you do not understand the inherent meaning of those verses, but only the meter, only the rhyme of that poem gives us immense pleasure, and we become attracted towards it. So he says that I just do not endorse the function of meter, I endorse the effect of meter also. The effect of meter is that it makes poem attractive. It does not make it a boring read. Therefore, this is the second argument. He says that meter must be in poetry. Then he says, thirdly, I deduce the position from all the causes elsewhere assigned, which render meter the proper form of poetry, and poetry imperfect and defective without meter. Meter, therefore, having been connected with poetry most often by a peculiar fitness, whatever else is combined with meter must, though it be not itself essentially poetic, have nevertheless some property in common with poetry, as an intermedium of affinity, a sort of mordaunt between it and the superadded meter. Now he is looking at causes, why I should endorse meter. And he says that even if I take, uh, you know, the case study from ages, from everywhere, what I find is that music is music. And music is not music without a proper meter, without a proper rhyme. Poetry in tribes, in Greeks, in ancient ages, in modern ages has had meter. So I do not go, out of the way, try to find some very hard, strong, difficult arguments in favor of meter. The fact is, if there was any human being on this earth, any individual on this earth, any man on this earth who has ever uttered poetry, he has uttered poetry in meter. He never uttered poetry in prose. You just cannot see Francis Bacon, standing on a dais and reading of studies and, of relations and of science and of friendship and of great places. And you are, enjoying the metricness of those sentences, short and pithy or long, whatever they be. No. That has never been the case. But whenever someone has stood and spoken in poetry, he has spoken in meter. So that is a very general argument that he gives in favor of the meter. Therefore, meter and poetry go hand in hand. You just cannot say that I am not going to use meter and it is poetry. It's not poetry. Poetry and meter go hand in hand. There has to be the blend of poetry and meter. Lastly, he says, I appeal to practice of the best poets of all countries and in all ages, as authorizing the opinion and in every import of the word essential, which would not here involve a mere truism. There may be, is, and ought to be an essential difference between the language of prose and of metrical composition. Now, no more arguments in favor of meter. No more arguments in favor of the difference between the language of poetry and the language of prose. The greatest argument that I would make is go and read, appeal all poets, read all poets that went before Wordsworth, poets who came after Wordsworth. Find a man on earth who was reading prose and said, I am reading poetry, because there is no essential difference between language of poetry and prose. All the proofs, all the poets that have written earlier, all the poets that would write in future, any man who ever uttered and said this is poetry, said it in meter, and everyone knows that there is a difference between the language of prose and the language of poetry. And here I end this argument that yes, there is a difference between the language of prose and the language of poetry. Language of poetry is metric, prose is not metric. So if you want to wish to write poetry, you have to write in meter, in proper rhyme. That was Biographia Literaria chapter 18. So we dealt with chapter 13, chapter 14, chapter 18. 2 lectures were delivered on Biographia Literaria. I hope that these lectures were helpful for you and you were able to understand Biographia Literaria in context of chapter 13, 14 and 18, which are primarily prescribed for the students of English literature. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to share, like, comment on the videos of your academy, and also don't forget to subscribe and press the bell icon button. Thank you for watching and keep watching your academy.